Before we delve into the shadows of the human heart, where love curdles into obsession and ambition sours into venom, I have to ask for your support. The stories we explore here are not for the faint of heart. They are journeys into the darkest corners of human nature. If you find yourself captivated, if you feel that chilling thrill of a story well told, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your subscription allows us to keep unearthing these tales of passion, betrayal, and consequence. It ensures you'll never miss a descent into the abyss. Thank you, and now settle in. We're about to explore a desire so potent, it became fatal, and a betrayal so cold, it was nothing short of savage. This is the story of the Vances, a tale we call Fatal Desire, Wife's Savage Betrayal. The Vance estate was less a home and more a monument to quiet, suffocating opulence. Perched atop a hill overlooking the glittering, indifferent city, it was a fortress of glass, steel, and imported Italian marble, designed by its owner, Richard Vance, to be both a showcase of his architectural genius and an impenetrable sanctuary. From the outside, it was a masterpiece of modern design. From the inside, for his wife Eleonora, it was the most beautiful prison ever constructed. Richard, 20 years her senior, was a man carved from granite and ambition. He had built his empire from the ground up, and he viewed everything in his life, including Eleonora, as a testament to his success. He loved her, of that she was certain, but it was the love a connoisseur has for a priceless sculpture. He admired her beauty, her grace, the way she reflected his status at cocktail parties and charity galas. He cherished her, but he did not see her. He saw a flawless accessory, the final, perfect acquisition to complete the collection of his life. Eleonora played the part exquisitely. She was the epitome of the devoted, elegant wife. Her days were a meticulously curated series of luncheons, gallery viewings, and fittings with designers who spoke her name in hushed, reverent tones. She managed the household staff with a serene efficiency that bordered on unnerving. She hosted dinners where conversations were as sterile and polished as the silverware. She smiled when Richard placed a proprietary hand on the small of her back, and she laughed at the same jokes his business partners had been telling for a decade. Every action was a performance, a role she had been rehearsing since the day she'd exchanged her modest, debt-ridden past for the gilded security of the Vance name. The rot, as it often does, began in the quiet moments. It festered in the long, silent evenings when Richard was cloistered in his study, communing with blueprints and balance sheets. His only sounds the clinking of ice in a whiskey glass and the low murmur of a business call. It bloomed in the vast, empty spaces of their king-sized bed, a cold expanse of high thread count sheets separating them. It was in these moments that Eleonora would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the silk duvet like a shroud. She was surrounded by immeasurable wealth, yet she had never felt more impoverished. The desire that had once driven Hera's desperate yearning for safety and stability had been satisfied, only to be replaced by a new, more dangerous hunger, the desire for a life that was her own. She began to see the details of her cage with excruciating clarity. The automated security gates that swept open for her Bentley were the same that locked her in at night. The floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panorama of the city also made her feel perpetually on display, a butterfly pinned under glass. Richard's gifts, a diamond necklace that felt as heavy as a yoke, a rare orchid that required more care than a newborn but offered no affection in return, were not tokens of love, but gilded bars. The catalyst for change arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet, persistent scent of turpentine and linseed oil. Richard had commissioned a portrait. It was to be a surprise for their 5th anniversary, a grand gesture. The artist, Julian Croft, was a rising star in the city's art scene, known for his raw, emotionally charged work that seemed to peel back the veneer of his subjects. Richard, who appreciated his growing fame and investment potential more than his actual art, had hired him without a second thought. Julian was everything Richard was not. Where Richard was solid, predictable, and controlled, Julian was fluid, intense, and chaotic. He arrived at the estate not in a luxury sedan, but on a roaring, vintage motorcycle, his leather jacket scuffed and his dark hair perpetually windswept. He didn't see the Mrs. Vance that society saw. From their very first session, his gaze cut through her carefully constructed facade. "Hold still," he'd murmured, his voice a low, gravelly hum that seemed to vibrate in the air of the sterile, white sunroom Richard had designated for the sittings. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, weren't looking at her pose, at the couture gown she wore, or the pearls at her throat. They were looking at the tension in her hands, the flicker of something desperate in her eyes that she thought she had long since extinguished. "Your husband wants a portrait of a goddess," Julian said, his charcoal stick dancing across the canvas with an almost violent energy. "He wants serenity, power, contentment, but that's not what I see." "And what do you see, Mr. Croft?" Eleonora had asked, her voice as cool and smooth as the marble floor. He stopped, his gaze locking with hers. "I see a queen in a castle, wondering if she's the ruler or the prisoner." That was the moment the first crack appeared in the foundation of her gilded life. Someone had finally seen her. Their sessions became the focal point of her existence. She found excuses to prolong them, to move them to his studio downtown, a chaotic, paint-splattered loft that felt more alive than her entire mansion. It was a world away from her sterile existence, a place of vibrant color, passionate creation, and unapologetic mess. Here, surrounded by his canvases, Eleonora felt she could breathe for the first time in years. The talk of art soon bled into talk of life. She spoke of her dreams before Richard, of a desire to travel, to be a photographer, a life she had traded for security. Julian spoke of his own struggles, his fierce independence, his refusal to sell out, to paint the sterile, corporate art that would make him rich but kill his soul. They were two sides of the same coin. She had sold her freedom for a cage of gold, and he was starving to keep his freedom in a world that only valued gold. The affair began inevitably with a single charged touch. He had been adjusting her pose, his hand brushing her shoulder. The jolt of electricity was so powerful, so real, it left them both breathless. The professional distance between them evaporated, consumed by a gravitational pull that had been building for weeks. Their first kiss was not gentle or romantic. It was a desperate, ravenous collision of two starving souls, a frantic act of rebellion in the dusty, sunlit loft. With Julian, Eleonora was not a statue. She was a living, breathing woman. Her desire, long dormant, awoke with a ferocity that frightened and thrilled her. The affair was a reckless, intoxicating fire in the barren landscape of her life. The hours spent in his loft were the only real hours of her week. The rest was just waiting, but reality was never far away. The stolen afternoons always ended. She would have to return to the marble fortress on the hill, scrub the scent of turpentine from her skin, and put on the mask of Mrs. Vance. The contrast became unbearable. The more alive she felt with Julian, the more dead she felt in her own home. Julian's loft was freedom. The Vance estate was a mausoleum. The seed of the idea was planted by Julian, though he didn't know it at the time. He was bemoaning his financial situation. A patron had pulled out, and his landlord was threatening eviction. "If I just had a windfall," he'd said, running a paint-stained hand through his hair in frustration. "Enough to be free, to paint what I want where I want, to take you with me. We could go to Florence, to Paris, anywhere but here." He was fantasizing, but Eleonora was not. His words echoed in her mind, taking root in the fertile soil of her discontent. Enough to be free. What was enough? Richard's net worth was in the hundreds of millions. A fraction of that would be a lifetime of freedom for them. But Richard would never let her go. His pride wouldn't allow it. A divorce would be a public declaration of his failure, a smudge on his perfect legacy. He would fight her, bleed her dry with lawyers, and leave her with nothing. He had told her as much once, during a rare argument, his voice cold and final. "You are my wife, Eleonora. You will always be my wife. Don't ever forget what you were before I found you." The memory of that threat, of the cold dismissal in his eyes, solidified her resolve. He would never set her free, so she would have to set herself free. She began to think. At first, the thoughts were vague, dark fantasies she would push away. But they kept returning, more detailed, more plausible each time. She thought of Richard's health. He wasn't a young man. He had high blood pressure, a fondness for rich food and expensive scotch. His doctor had warned him, but Richard Vance did not heed warnings. He was a man who bent the world to his will. He believed his own body would follow suit. It started subtly. A casual question to Richard's doctor at a charity event about his stress levels. An offhand remark to a friend about Richard's exhaustion. She was planting the seeds, creating a narrative of a man whose relentless drive was finally taking its toll. She was no longer just playing the part of the perfect wife. She was now the concerned, doting wife, a role that provided the perfect cover. She approached the subject with Julian cautiously, testing the waters. "What if we didn't have to wait for a windfall?" she asked one afternoon, her head resting on his chest, the rhythm of his heart a steady drum against her ear. What if there was a way to have it all? The money, the freedom, us. Julian, lost in the afterglow of their passion, was slow to understand. "What do you mean? Rob a bank?" he joked. Eleonora didn't smile. She sat up, her eyes holding his with a new, chilling intensity. "Richard has a life insurance policy. A very, very large one. He also has a will that leaves everything to me. He calls me his legacy." The word dripped with a venomous irony. Julian stared at her, the playful light in his eyes dying, replaced by a dawning horror and a flicker of something else, greed. "Eleonora, what are you saying?" "He's not well, Julian," she said, her voice a soft, persuasive whisper. "His heart is weak. His doctor is worried. It wouldn't be unexpected. It would be a tragedy. A terrible, terrible tragedy." This was the true beginning of the savage betrayal. It wasn't born in the heat of passion, but in the cold, calculating silence of a woman who had decided that her freedom was worth more than a man's life. She was turning Julian, her passionate, free-spirited artist, into a conspirator. She was taking his desire for freedom and twisting it into a weapon. Julian was her first masterpiece of manipulation. She painted a future for him so vivid, so intoxicating, that it overshadowed the darkness of the act required to achieve it. A sprawling studio in Tuscany, overlooking vineyards. A life where he would never again have to compromise his art for money. A life with her, free from the shadow of Richard Vance. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the war between his conscience and his desire, and she knew which one she had to nurture. "He's a good man," Julian whispered, almost to himself, a last gasp of his morality. "He is a powerful man who owns things," Eleonora corrected, her voice like ice. "He owns his company, he owns our home, and he owns me. Don't you want to be with a woman who is free? Or do you want to be the secret I keep, tucked away in the shadows of his life forever?" She had framed the choice perfectly. It was no longer about killing a man. It was about liberating a woman. It was about their future, their art, their love. The planning began in earnest, in hushed tones in the paint-splattered loft. It was Eleonora who was the architect of this dark design. Her mind, once occupied with guest lists and flower arrangements, now focused on pharmacology, on tasteless, untraceable poisons that could mimic the effects of a heart attack. She researched Richard's medications, his daily routine, his habits. Her meticulous, orderly nature made her a terrifyingly effective plotter. She discovered that a particular variety of oleander, a beautiful but deadly flowering shrub, grew in a secluded corner of their own meticulously manicured gardens. Its toxins, when extracted and administered in small, regular doses, could slowly weaken the heart, causing arrhythmia and eventual cardiac arrest, symptoms that would be easily mistaken for a natural failure in a man of Richard's age and lifestyle. The irony was exquisite. The weapon of his demise would come from the very symbol of his oppressive, perfect world. Julian's role was to be the outsider, the alibi. His hands would be clean, at least in the physical sense. His task was to remain her secret, to be the future she was running towards. but his complicity was the chain that bound him to her. He was no longer just her lover. He was her co-conspirator, his silence and his shared knowledge making him as guilty as she was. The portrait was nearing completion. It was a masterpiece, but a chilling one. Julian had, in the end, painted what he saw. On the canvas, Eleanora Vance was stunningly beautiful, serene, and regal. But in her eyes, there was a glint of cold ambition, a shadow of a secret that made the viewer uneasy. It was the portrait of a queen who was not a prisoner, but a predator, waiting for her moment to strike. Richard loved it. "Perfect," he'd boomed, looking at the painting and then at his wife. "You've captured her essence, Croft. My perfect, beautiful Eleanora." He was blind to the warning on the canvas, just as he was blind to the woman standing beside him. The night before the final, largest dose was to be administered, Eleanora stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her bedroom, looking out at the city lights. She felt no fear, no remorse. The years of quiet resentment had hollowed her out, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. Richard was not a person to her anymore. He was an obstacle, an equation to be solved. His death was the final, necessary step to her liberation. The desire that had started as a vague yearning for something more had now become a fatal, all-consuming fire, and she was ready to let it burn down everything in its path. Downstairs, she could hear the familiar clink of ice as Richard poured his nightly scotch. It would be his last. She turned from the window, her reflection a ghostly image against the dark glass. The woman in the portrait was ready. The execution of the plan was a masterclass in quiet, domestic terror. Eleanora moved through the final days with the serene, unhurried grace of a dancer performing a well-rehearsed ballet. Her performance as the doting wife intensified. She monitored Richard's diet with renewed vigor, publicly chiding him for his love of red meat and fine cigars. A performance of concern that would be remembered later by friends and staff. In private, she began adding the carefully prepared oleander extract to his nightly decanter of scotch. It was a ritual of chilling intimacy. She would pour the amber liquid, add the clear, odorless drops of poison, and swirl the glass gently before carrying it into his study, a loving smile fixed on her face. "You work too hard, darling," she would say, placing the glass on his desk. "You need to relax." Richard, oblivious, would accept the drink with a distracted nod, his eyes already back on his blueprints. He was drinking a toast to his own success, served by the woman who was meticulously plotting its end. Each sip he took was a testament to her control, a slow, deliberate countdown to her freedom. She watched the subtle changes in him. A growing fatigue he blamed on work, a slight shortness of breath he attributed to his age, a faint tremor in his hands he ignored completely. The poison was working its insidious magic, weaving itself into his bloodstream, a silent partner to his existing ailments. Julian, meanwhile, was unraveling. The abstract concept of the plan had been intoxicating, a dark fantasy of rebellion and reward. The reality was a constant, gnawing anxiety that curdled his stomach and stole his sleep. Every phone call from an unknown number made him jump. Every distant siren sounded like it was coming for him. The passion that had fueled their affair was now tainted with fear. Their meetings in the loft became less about love and more about reassurance. "Are you sure this will work?" he would ask, pacing the floor of his studio, unable to paint. "What if they do an autopsy? What if they find something?" "They will find what they expect to find." Eleanora would soothe him, her voice a steady, calming anchor in his sea of panic. A man of his age, with his lifestyle and his blood pressure. There's a tragedy waiting to happen. We are simply letting it happen. There will be nothing to find, Julian. I've been so careful. Her calmness was more terrifying than his panic. She had compartmentalized the act, filed it away under necessary business. While he was haunted by the ghost of a man still living, she was already planning their future life in Tuscany. She was the architect and he was just a tool. The realization was slowly dawning on him, and it was a cold one. He was bound to her not just by love, but by a crime that would forever stain his soul. The chosen night was the night of their 5th anniversary. The symbolism was a final, cruel twist of the knife from Eleonora. Richard had planned a quiet evening at home. He was sentimental about such dates, a fact Eleonora found both pathetic and useful. A private chef had prepared a lavish meal. Richard presented her with his gift first, a deed to a small, charming villa on the Amalfi coast. "For us," he said, his eyes shining with a genuine affection that, for a fleeting moment, almost pricked her conscience. "A place to escape to, just you and me. We'll grow old there." The irony was suffocating. She smiled, a perfect, brilliant smile, and kissed him. "It's wonderful, Richard." "Thank you." Her gift to him was a vintage, first-edition book on Roman architecture she knew he coveted. Tucked within its pages was her silent, final promise. Later that evening, as he settled into his study with his book and his customary scotch, she administered the final, potent dose. It was significantly larger than the previous ones, calculated to induce a massive, fatal cardiac event. She kissed his forehead. "Don't stay up too late, my love," she whispered. It was the serpent's kiss, the ultimate act of betrayal, delivered with a tenderness that was her most monstrous lie. Eleonora retired to her bedroom, but not to sleep. She sat in a silk armchair, a book lying unread in her lap, and she waited. Every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind outside, was magnified in the silence. She was listening for the sound of her freedom. Came just after 2 a.m. A heavy, sickening thud from the study below. It was the sound of Richard's body hitting the floor. For a moment she didn't move. A strange, hollow calm washed over her. It was done. The cage was open. Then the performance began again. She took a deep, steadying breath and descended the grand staircase, calling his name with a manufactured note of concern. "Richard? Darling? Are you coming to bed?" She feigned surprise, then panic. Her scream was a work of art, a raw, piercing shriek of horror and grief that echoed through the cavernous house, waking the live-in staff. She rushed to his side, fumbling for a pulse she knew she wouldn't find, her hands trembling not from fear, but from a surge of adrenaline and triumph. The scene she had rehearsed in her mind 100 times was now real. The shattered whiskey glass, the sprawling body, the book lying open on the floor. By the time the paramedics and police arrived, Eleonora was the picture of a devastated widow. She was wrapped in a cashmere blanket, her body shaking with convulsive sobs, her words choked and incoherent. She clung to the arm of her housekeeper, letting the woman comfort her as she gave a tearful, fragmented account of finding her beloved husband. The first responders were gentle, their faces a mixture of pity and professional detachment. The initial assessment on the scene was exactly what Eleonora had predicted. "Looks like a massive coronary, ma'am," the senior paramedic told her softly. "Given his age and medical history, I'm so sorry for your loss." But among the uniforms and sympathetic faces was one that did not offer comfort. Detective Isabella Rossi was a small, sharp-featured woman with eyes that missed nothing. She had a reputation for being methodical, cynical, and possessing an almost supernatural intuition for when a scene was wrong. And the scene in Richard Vance's study, for all its tragic plausibility, felt wrong. It was the order, the perfect, almost staged order of it all. The book had fallen neatly beside him. The shattered glass was contained in a small area. The man was dead, but the room itself was undisturbed. And then there was the wife. Rossi had seen grief in all its ugly, messy forms. Eleonora's grief was beautiful. It was cinematic. Her tears fell perfectly. Her hair was barely mussed. Her sorrow was as elegant as her silk robe. It was a flawless performance, and that was precisely what made Rossi suspicious. "Mrs. Vance," Rossi said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the sympathetic murmurs of the other officers. "I know this is a difficult time, but I need to ask a few questions. Was your husband complaining of any specific symptoms tonight? Chest pains? Dizziness?" Eleonora looked up, her eyes wide and swimming with tears. "He seemed tired," she stammered. "He was always tired. He worked so hard. I told him." I told him he needed to slow down. Her voice broke on a sob. It was perfect. Rossi's gaze was unwavering. His drink. Was that his usual? She asked, gesturing towards the shattered glass. His nightly scotch. A double, Eleonora confirmed. He's had one every night for 20 years. Despite the apparent natural causes, Rossi's instincts screamed for a full investigation. Due to the circumstances, Mariamth's deceased's high profile, the medical examiner will require an autopsy. It's standard procedure. Eleonora's heart gave a single hard jolt, a flicker of genuine fear that she quickly suppressed. An autopsy. She had anticipated this. She had researched it. Common toxins would be found, but oleandrin was rare, difficult to detect unless you were specifically looking for it. And why would they look for it? She composed her features into a mask of weary acceptance. Of course, detective. Whatever is necessary. The next few days were a blur of arrangements and condolences. Flowers filled the mansion, their sweet scent cloying and funereal. The phone rang incessantly with calls from shocked friends and business associates, and Eleonora played her role for each of them. Her voice a fragile, grief-stricken whisper. She informed Richard's lawyers, who set the wheels of his estate in motion. The will was clear and uncontested. Eleonora Vance was now one of the wealthiest women in the country. She called Julian only once, from a burner phone, their conversation short and cryptic. It's done, she said. I saw it on the news, he whispered, his voice sounding thin and reedy. They said it was a heart attack. It was, she replied coolly. A tragic, terrible heart attack. I'll be in touch when things have settled. Lie low, Julian. Don't call me. She hung up before he could reply, severing the connection. He was a loose end, a liability she would need to manage carefully. The passion that had once drawn them together was now a dangerous bond of shared guilt. A week later, Detective Rossi called. She wanted to meet with Eleonora again, at the precinct. Just a few follow-up questions, Mrs. Vance, she'd said, her tone polite but brooking no argument. Eleonora arrived with her lawyer, a calm, formidable man who had been on Richard's payroll for years. She was dressed in tasteful, expensive black, a grieving widow in her prime. The interview room was small and gray, a stark contrast to the luxury she was used to. Rossi sat opposite her, a thin file on the table between them. The preliminary autopsy report is back, Mrs. Vance. Rossi began, her eyes fixed on Eleonora's face, watching for the slightest reaction. As expected, the M.E. confirmed the cause of death as cardiac arrest. There were clear signs of advanced coronary artery disease. Everything points to a natural, if untimely, death. Eleonora felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her. She had done it. She was free. She allowed a single, dignified tear to trace a path down her cheek. But, Rossi continued, leaning forward slightly, there were some anomalies. The air in the room grew cold. Anomalies? Eleonora's lawyer asked, his voice sharp. Some biochemical markers in his blood that the ME couldn't immediately identify. And some minor petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, which can sometimes be indicative of distress. Rossi paused, letting the words hang in the air. So we're running a more detailed toxicology screen. A full panel. It will take a little more time. We like to be thorough. Eleonora's composure was a fortress, but she could feel a hairline crack appear in its walls. A full panel. They were looking for something. Had she made a mistake? Was there a trace? Her mind raced, replaying every step, every calculation. It was supposed to be undetectable. I'm sure you'll find nothing out of the ordinary, detective, Eleonora said, her voice miraculously steady. My husband was a sick man. This is just prolonging the agony for me. I understand, Rossi said, though her eyes said something else entirely. They said, I see you. I see the performance. And I will wait. Eleonora left the precinct with her mask of grief firmly in place. But inside, a new, cold fear was beginning to bloom. The bars of her gilded cage had vanished, but she was not yet free. She was now in a different kind of prison. The agonizing, uncertain wait for a toxicology report that could either secure her future or condemn her to ruin. The ghost of Richard Vance was not yet at rest, and the shadow of Detective Rossi loomed long and dark over her newfound freedom. The savage betrayal was complete, but the battle for survival had just begun. The weeks that followed Richard's death were a masterclass in calculated deception for Eleonora, and a slow descent into paranoia for Julian. While Eleonora flawlessly navigated the labyrinth of probate court, shareholder meetings, and the endless parade of pitying visitors, Julian was a prisoner in his own loft. Every footstep on the stairs outside his door was Detective Rossi coming for him. Every ringing phone was a summons to justice. The vibrant canvases that had once been his sanctuary now felt like silent, accusing witnesses. He couldn't paint. His hands, which had once moved with such fluid grace, now trembled. The desire that had led him down this path had soured into a toxic cocktail of guilt and terror. Eleonora, in stark contrast, grew into her new role with unnerving ease. She was no longer just the wife of the great Richard Vance. She was the Vance legacy. She attended board meetings for Richard's firm, her presence cool and commanding, her insights surprisingly sharp. She had, it turned out, been paying more attention to his business over the years than he had ever realized. She was not just a beautiful accessory. She was a predator who had studied her ecosystem perfectly before taking her place at the top of the food chain. But beneath the surface of her icy composure, the fear remained, a low, constant hum. The toxicology report. It was a sword of Damocles hanging over her perfect, new world. She channeled that fear into action, using her newfound resources to hire a private investigator, a discreet man with a background in corporate espionage. His task was not to investigate the police, but to investigate Detective Rossi herself. Eleonora knew that in any battle you must understand your enemy. Meanwhile, Rossi was a dog with a bone. The anomalies in the initial report were her entire focus. The ME, a weary, overworked man named Dr. Alistair Finch, had initially dismissed them as statistical noise. But Rossi's persistence was legendary. She pushed, she questioned, she cajoled, until Finch, more to get her out of his office than out of true belief, agreed to run the expanded toxicology panel she'd requested, sending the samples to a specialized lab known for forensic botany and obscure poison detection. "It's a 1-in-a-million shot, Izzy," Finch had told her, "and it costs the department a fortune. This better not be another one of your hunches. Grief shouldn't be that beautiful, Alistair," was all Rossi had replied. Rossi's investigation extended beyond the lab. She began quietly building a picture of the Vances life, interviewing friends, former employees, and business rivals. The public image was flawless. A powerful, brilliant man and his adoring, elegant wife. But Rossi was looking for the cracks. She found one in the form of a disgruntled former housekeeper, fired by Eleonora a year prior for a minor infraction. The woman, bitter and resentful, painted a different picture. She was cold, the housekeeper said, stirring her coffee in a small, cramped kitchen that was a world away from the Vance estate, like something out of a magazine, not a real person. He doted on her, bought her everything, but she looked at him. Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she looked at him like he was a bug. And the artist, he was around a lot. Too much, if you ask me. They'd be in the sunroom for sittings, and the door would be closed for hours. The artist, Julian Croft. Rossi's instincts fired. She pulled his file. Financially struggling, a reputation for being intense, and suddenly, after Richard Vance's death, he seemed to have disappeared. His phone went to voicemail and his studio was dark. A coincidence? Rossi didn't believe in them. The pressure was breaking Julian. Eleonora had forbidden contact, but his desperation was overriding his caution. He needed to see her, to hear her say everything was all right. He started calling her from payphones, his voice a panicked whisper. "They're asking questions, Eleonora. A detective was at my building, talking to my landlord," he hissed into the phone one night. Eleonora's patience, already worn thin by her own anxieties, snapped. Julian was no longer her passionate lover. He was a loose cannon, a whining child who threatened to bring everything crashing down. "Get a hold of yourself," she commanded, her voice a whip crack of ice over the line. "You are a struggling artist. You have nothing to do with this. The only thing connecting you to this is your own pathetic fear. Disappear for a while, Julian. Go camping. Visit a relative. But do not contact me again." Her coldness was a physical blow. He finally understood. She wasn't his partner. She was his handler. He had been a means to an end, a tool to be used and then discarded. The love he thought they shared was an illusion she had crafted to secure his loyalty. The realization didn't just hurt. It terrified him. A woman who could so callously plan her husband's murder would have no qualms about eliminating a liability. For the first time, Julian wasn't afraid of the police, he was afraid of Eleonora. The turning point came from the specialized lab. A young, ambitious toxicologist, intrigued by the unidentifiable markers, had cross-referenced them against a database of cardiac glycosides found in plants. And he got a hit: oleandrin, a poison potent, rare in toxicology reports, and famously difficult to trace. A poison found in the oleander plant. When Rossi got the call, she felt a cold surge of vindication. She immediately secured a warrant to search the Vance estate. It was no longer a wellness check or a follow-up. It was a full-blown homicide investigation. Rossi and her team descended on the monument of glass and steel. They were meticulous, professional, and they ignored Eleonora's theatrical protests of harassment. While one team bagged samples from every plant in the garden, another went through the house. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. The kitchen pantry. Tucked away on a high shelf, behind a row of expensive, exotic spices, was a small, unmarked vial of clear liquid. At the same time, Rossi's background check on Julian Croft bore fruit. She found the payments for the portrait, but also a more recent, clandestine transfer of a large sum of money from an offshore account set up by Eleonora into a new account opened by Julian. It was his first payment, the down payment on his freedom. It was also a direct, damning link between them. The vial from the pantry tested positive for a high concentration of oleandrin. The garden shears in the potting shed had traces of oleander sap on them. The case was no longer circumstantial. It was a fortress of forensic evidence. Eleonora knew the moment she saw Rossi's face on her doorstep for the third time that the game was over. But she had one last savage move to play. If she was going down, she would not go down alone. And she would ensure her accomplice, the man who had become her greatest weakness, would take the fall. She had anticipated this possibility. In a final act of cold calculation, she had fabricated a story, a new narrative. She confessed to Rossi that she had been having an affair with Julian. She painted him as a manipulative, desperate man, obsessed with her and her wealth. Richard had found out, she claimed, and had threatened to ruin him. Julian was furious. Eleonora cried. This time her tears a product of genuine, self-pitying despair. He said he would handle it. He said Richard couldn't keep us apart. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what he meant. She told them about the money, framing it as blackmail. He demanded money to keep quiet about our affair. I was scared. I gave it to him. It was a brilliant, venomous lie, designed to frame Julian as a jilted, murderous lover. She was burning her last bridge, sacrificing her pawn to save the queen. But Julian, driven by his own terror, had made a contingency plan. During one of their last, tense meetings, sensing her detachment, he had secretly recorded their conversation on his phone. It was a desperate act of self-preservation. On the recording, Eleonora's voice was not that of a scared, blackmailed woman. It was cold, precise, and utterly damning. The dosage has to be exact, Julian. No mistakes. Remember the plan. You stay quiet, and in 6 months we'll be in Tuscany. But if you panic, if you make one stupid mistake, you will drag us both down into hell. When the police finally tracked Julian to a cheap motel 2 states away, he was a broken man. Faced with Eleonora's betrayal, he didn't hesitate. He gave them the phone. He gave them everything. The recording was the final nail in the coffin. The arrest of Eleanora Vance was the society story of the decade. The images of the beautiful, composed widow being led away in handcuffs were splashed across every news outlet. Her mask of serenity finally shattered, revealing the cold, reptilian ambition beneath. Her fatal desire had not led her to a sun-drenched villa in Tuscany, but to a sterile, windowless cell. The Vance estate, her gilded cage and the scene of her crime, was seized as an asset. The priceless art was auctioned off, the designer furniture put into storage. The monument to Richard Vance's success became a hollow, empty shell, a testament not to a great legacy, but to a savage betrayal. The beautiful gardens, including the corner where the lovely, lethal oleander grew, were left to become overgrown and wild. In the end, Eleanora's inheritance was not one of wealth and freedom, but a legacy of ash. She had traded a life sentence in a beautiful prison for a literal one in a concrete box, all for a desire so powerful it had consumed her soul, leaving nothing behind but the chilling memory of a serpent's kiss.